Hello and welcome to On the Cube Leadership Podcast, where we take everyday events and take some metaphors from those things that happen in pop culture, in politics, in the business realm, in ministry, and in the Bible to see how we can be better leaders. I'm Craig O'Sullivan, and you're here also with Dr. Rod St. Hill, the business pastor. Dr. Rod, welcome again.
It's good again to be with you, Craig. It's a wonderful privilege and pleasure.
A pleasure as always. Now, okay, today's topic, we actually have a bit of a theme for today. Not always, but sometimes I get inspired around, and God brings all the right messages, all the right events that happen onto a bit of a theme. And today we want to talk about the theme that leaders are innovators. Leaders are innovators. And, well, who better to kick this off with than the innovator of all innovators, I suppose, Elon Musk. Now, the other day, I was watching an interview with Jay Leno, who goes around and, looks at, interviews people around their cars and stuff like that. Now, he actually wasn't really interviewing Elon around his cars. He was interviewing him around another vehicle, his spaceships. Yeah, he was going on this tour through SpaceX and where they're building everything. It was absolutely incredible. Great interview. You should go check that out. It's available on YouTube. And there was one thing that Elon said that really, really, really stood out to me. And it was this, Jay Leno asked him, was like, with all this stuff you're creating, with all these innovations you have, you must have a lot of patents. And Elon's reply, as usual, was, a retweetable quote, which was quite amazing, where he just says, patents are for the weak. Patents are for the weak, which I thought was really interesting because obviously big corporations, that's part of their IP. And Dr. Rod, you and I spoke a few weeks ago about IP and the value of that as well. But it was really interesting how he was able to push past that and just say, hey, look, we've got to innovate. We as a company have to be on the front foot of innovations. Patents cause us to play defensive rather than offensive. It causes us to stop and try to protect what we've got rather than moving forward and being better. And he goes, if I put patents, it stops innovations. He goes, one thing that I really love about Elon is he is so aligned with his purpose. He can focus on the mission, not necessarily the money, which is easy to say when you're one of the richest men on the planet. But he does live it out by living a very reasonably simple lifestyle, selling all his possessions, living in like a $40,000 house and all that sort of stuff. But it's really interesting that he says, look, it's our job to push forward, to innovate, to change the combustible engine and to change space travel and change how we live on different planets, everything like that. We can't do that if we're all stuck behind patents. Dr. Rod, what's your take on being a leader and innovating and, I suppose, finding that balance between the protection of your innovation but moving forward and not looking backwards?
Well, look, there's no doubt that Elon Musk is an innovator. He's the innovator's innovator. There's no doubt about that. And, of course, he moves so fast that it's quite true. Going through the patenting process would really slow him down and would probably be deleterious to his own business model.
Yeah.
So I have no doubt that in his context, what he says is absolutely true. And it's really refreshing to hear somebody who doesn't want to hide behind the protection of patents. However, for many of us, the patent process is quite good because it provides opportunity for those who are creative, the innovators, to actually get a return on their investment of time and any financial investment that they might have made in their own innovation.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's one of these things which has both a plus side and a minus side. And I would say if we're speaking to leaders who are a little like Elon Musk, who are forward thinkers, rapid innovators and who have money behind them as he did and as he does, then don't worry about the patent system and don't worry about worrying about the patent system. Go ahead. The other thing I would say too, of course, is be led by God as a leader in this thing too. And you see, some of us, of course, would understand that it is God who's made us creative. God gives us the creative ideas, and those creative ideas are for the benefit of the whole of humankind. So a lot of it's going to depend on where we come from in terms of how we express our understanding of Christian worldview in the first place. But as someone who's got a degree in economics, a couple of degrees actually in economics, and a long time teaching economics, I can see that the patenting system definitely has some pluses, particularly in industries where there's a very long gestation period in new products.
Yeah.
For example, in medicines and so on. But look, in these fast-moving, highly technological areas, you're probably better off to be like Elon Musk and just spend your time, your money, and all your energy innovating, because you'll stay one step ahead of the crowd that way.
Yeah, that's so true. It's we should be focusing our efforts as leaders on constantly innovating in our organization, innovating even just in ourselves, innovate ourselves. How are we becoming better leaders? How are we innovating? How we're leading other people, but also in our organization, how much more can we innovate ahead of everyone else in our industry? It's not about competition. It's not about me versus you, and because that's not kingdom. Kingdom doesn't, the kingdom, obviously with, the patents and everything like that. Obviously, Dr. Rod, you've mentioned that there are some good reasons for patents and agreed. But the way that, Jay Leno asked this question of Elon, and the way that Elon answered it, it was just such an abundant mindset. There's plenty to go around. He knows that he wants other car manufacturers to innovate in electric vehicles. He doesn't want to be the only person. He doesn't want to be the only person going to Mars. He's innovating to make sure he can do it, but he knows that he's not going to achieve that ultimate vision if he's the only person doing it. And it's not a them or us mentality. It's a let's do this together. And you may have, let's call them competitors in your industry, but rather than looking at them as competitors, what if you looked at them as partners, people that are all working together, trying to bring forward the quality and the service of the industry? I speak about that we've recently moved here to the Dominican Republic, and my aim is I want to help people in the Dominican Republic, like there's certain business owners that I'm starting to work with, that I've spoken to them. I said, I want to help you guys become industry leaders. Yes, so you can become more wealthy, but what it could do is, the old saying that all boats rise with the tide. Like if I can get you guys to operate at a higher standard, that's only going to bring everyone else's standards up. And what if we were that way, that we're trying to challenge our industry to move forward and to grow and improve, rather than trying to defend and block? And just think about that. Think about how much time a business, an organization, or maybe even you spend trying to be defensive against competitors. What if you even joined arms? What if you shared? What if there was some way that you could, because there's probably one part of the business that you're really good at, one part of the business they're really good at. You could all share. One of my clients, she's a funeral director, and she's on a mission to shift her industry, the funeral industry, and she did that by actually forming a part of an industry body of all these people that they're all sharing ways to improve technology as a way to improve things, rather than it being this really everyone's in a silo and everyone's separated. Dr. Rod, how can we collaborate with other people in our industry while still making sure, like the abundant mindset, there is enough to go around for everyone, but we do have to make sure we protect ourselves. How do we find the balance?
Well, as always, good question. Not so easy to answer. I think the first thing we've got to settle in our own hearts and minds is that we work for God.
Yeah.
In other words, God is our boss. Whatever position we lead from, God is our boss, and we trust in him. So whatever happens, we have already made up our minds that we will trust in God.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. And the second is, we don't really need to worry if our ideas are used by somebody else, because God is our provider and our protector ultimately. Now, that doesn't mean to say we should be unwise. And I think in a case like patents, definitely there are some circumstances under which it would be wise to get a patent.
Yeah.
However, that's a big process and an expensive process, and you need to decide whether or not that's actually going to be worthwhile, or whether you're nimble enough to stay one step ahead of everybody else. Craig, you mentioned the whole idea that we're not really in competition with our brothers and sisters. I agree with that. If we come out with the top market share, it should be because we are the best in our industry at solving the problem that our product or products are designed to solve. So our focus, as you rightly say, should always be on our product. Yep. We should always be asking ourselves, and answering for that matter, the question, are we doing all that we can to solve the problem that we have identified? Because people are paying for a solution to a problem.
Yeah, that's good.
Whatever industry we're in, ultimately, that's what we're doing. We're providing a solution. And there's competition, obviously, between the various solutions that are on offer. But that doesn't mean that as Christians in business, we are literally competing against our brothers and sisters who are in the same industry, or indeed anybody else who is in the same industry. And I don't think we should fear helping one of our competitors if they're doing it tough, because that is always a good thing, perhaps the right thing to do as a Christian. And I've used this picture before, of course, of farmers in rural communities helping each other in times of crisis, where there's a fire or a flood. They don't act as if they're in competition with one another. They act as if they are neighbours, and often they literally are.
Yeah.
We really should bring that thinking into the business world, and that there's our so-called competitors. They're people like us whom God loves. We need to show them love. And for those who are not Christian, of course, we need to be doing everything that we can to make them disciples of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. We it's not a patent, but it's trademark. We have trademarked our brand, and that's something that you should do, is protect your brand. But we spend all our time and money in investing in the right trademarks. And just before launch, probably about a month or so ago, we found that someone else was using a very, very similar trademark to ours, although they were using the very similar brand in a similar industry, everything like that. And we actually decided, you know what, we could fight them, and because they're infringing on trademarks. But you know what? They're fulfilling a purpose. We're all fulfilling. Like they're contributing to our ultimate mission as well. We don't have to be the ones that fulfill the ultimate mission. We just want the mission achieved. And so we decided, you know what? We're going to cop the financial loss and resubmit trademarks, change all our branding, and we probably we probably spent about $20,000 on rebranding and the time it took and the legal fees and everything like that. But I actually, we all agreed that, you know what, it's better just to, you know what, bless them. I mean, they have no idea that this even happened, because we're like, you know what, let's just leave it alone, leave them to fulfill their mission, and that's fine. We'll change our stuff, and that's part of the way we need to be in the kingdom. Is we can't, yes, we need to protect ourselves. Yes, you need to protect with something. Protect your brand. Do everything you can. I own all the URLs, every possible URL I can of that. Or we have the trademark of the, but then when it comes to protecting that, you know what? Is it really worth the legal fight to fight other people? Or should we all be championing and encouraging each other along the way? So a question or a statement from Elon Musk: patents are for the weak. The question is, are you innovating or are you protecting? Are you trying to play defense or are you playing offense as a leader? Let's transition into our next topic of actually kind of a very, very similar vein of playing defense versus offense. And Dr. Rod, this is, you got really excited when we chose we were going to talk about this one. Let's talk about politics for a moment. And let me ask you a question. I'll ask you a question, but then I'll follow it up with a statement: is, are we in a recession? Because there's all this stuff that's going on, and there's all these these articles of the American government, the United States government changing the definition of what it is, and then it's not them, it's some other, it's three guys in a room that actually make the decision or whatever. There's all these different levels of things of what a recession is, and there's a difference between a felt recession and an emotional recession and a practical one and all this sort of stuff. Obviously, coming out of COVID, everyone's hurt. But then there's also a lot of people that have really greatly benefited also. So, Dr. Rod, number one, are we in a recession? And number two, how do we know?
Well, I think the answer to the first question is no, we're not in a recession. And that generally applies to most of the world's economies. But obviously different economies have different experiences across time and also at the same time. Yes, there's been a significant debate, particularly in the United States, over what is a recession. And, the political sides have, I guess they've put their stakes in the ground. I would say this, though, I think there's a significant danger that most of the significant economies in the world will fall into recession over the next 6 to 12 months. A lot of the debate has been over whether or not you've got a recession after you've recorded 2 successive quarters of what we call negative growth. That is, where your growth in your what we call gross domestic product, or in some cases gross national product, where that turns negative. So instead of growing at, say, 2%, you grow at, say, minus 0.5%. So a rough rule of thumb is that if you get 2 consecutive quarters, that amounts to 6 months of negative growth, then you are in recession. But look, take the case of Australia. We've still got what we call full employment. Our unemployment rate it's been around 3.5% for a little while now, and we know that there'll always be some unemployment because there are people who are between jobs, and there are people who are just entering the workforce and so on and so forth. So there will always be a certain level of recorded unemployment. But in Australia's case at the present time, we've got an almost exact match between job vacancies and the number of people who are recorded as being unemployed.
Yeah.
So we've got full employment, even though the economy clearly is slowing down. That hasn't yet shown in the official figures, but we know anecdotally, for example, that products are shifting much more slowly out of warehouses. As you know, a lot of people do online shopping now. Online shopping is taking a bit of a cooler at the moment, and that, I think, is a pointer towards a more widespread slowdown into the future. I think the biggest issue for us right now is inflation, and that inflation is pretty much self-induced. It's the result of very, very high government spending during the COVID pandemic, where
high
governments
spending?
virtually
What do you
all
mean?
over.
What
Pardon?
how did the government spend money? Did they really? Did they? Really?
Yeah, I know. They spent like drunken sailors. Apologies to anyone who happens to be a drunken sailor. But, I think history is going to be quite unkind to many governments because of the way they reacted in a policy sense to the pandemic. You see, one of the effects of the pandemic was to actually slow down what we call the supply side of the economy.
Yeah.
That inevitably causes a temporary increase in prices while you've got those issues on the supply side. What happened on the supply side? Production slowed down because so many people were sick. It also slowed down because the government imposed lockdowns and other restrictions on employment of people who had symptoms, et cetera, et cetera.
And speculation.
There were disruptions to supply chains. That's compounded, of course, by the war in Ukraine, given that that area of the world is a very substantial producer of agricultural products. So the problem with government spending is it increases demand. It does absolutely nothing to improve the supply side of the economy. What it does is that it increases demand. Now, because of the pandemic restrictions, people were increasing their savings. They were getting bigger and bigger bank balances. They couldn't spend the money.
Yeah.
And since the restrictions have been lifted, of course, they've been able to spend the money. And that has compounded the issue of price rises associated with the supply side of the economy. That's why I call this a self-inflicted bout of inflation. And what we're doing to deal with it, in most countries, we're not reducing government spending. In some cases, we're not even reducing the rate of growth in government spending, but we're doing it through increasing interest rates.
Yeah.
And that will definitely slow things down. It will slow demand down, but it's not going to help the supply side because it makes borrowing more expensive. And so businesses are not going to invest in improving systems and increasing their production and perhaps robotizing more of their production so that they're not so reliant on human beings in production and so forth. That's not going to affect the supply side at all. So, yes, we've certainly got an inflation problem. I don't think we've got a significant recession problem yet. But let me tell you, if interest rates keep going the way they are, they're very rapid increases, then we're going to have a self-inflicted recession following self-inflicted, or maybe I should say a government-inflicted recession following government-inflicted inflation.
Yeah.
And we'll know when there's a recession. See, most people know when there's a recession because it's more difficult to find a job, or your hours of employment each week go down. And economists would actually define a recession by looking at a number of different factors, including the published factors on the published data on economic growth, but they also look at what's happening to the rate of unemployment and the growth of new jobs. They'll look at what's happening to what we call real income as well, what purchasing power households actually have, and that will be affected by things like the level of prices, the level of wages, and the rate of unemployment, of course. And we also look at things like consumer spending. So our household spending, what they used to spend on things like motor vehicles, fridges, washing machines, and entertainment, those kinds of things. So economists would generally look at a whole range of data before they make a decision as to whether or not we're actually in a recession. But I do think right now, the kind of data to keep our eyes on would be things like what's happening to stock in warehouses. That's a particularly important indicator at this time.
Yeah. So kind of back to your point about like robotizing the workforce and people like doing big investments into, because let's bring this back to a leadership conversation, because we as leaders need to be able to make the right decisions now. How do we innovate right now in, quote unquote, a recession or a speculative recession? Because you're talking about like investing into robotizing workforce. While we saw a spike during COVID of demand and everything, there was also obviously the supply side. It was the issue with the supply side was because all the big manufacturers, all the big companies thought that there was going to be a downturn. So they canceled all their orders, they stopped production, they slowed everything down in preparation for a slowdown in demand. But then it was a reverse. Now we're seeing that demand, as you say, kind of fall back into, not really like you say, cool off, but it's kind of just becoming normal. It's kind of balancing out now. I kind of speculating on that, but obviously the reason why a large organization isn't focusing on investing in robotizing their workforce, investing in increasing production, because how do we know how long it's going to last for? So how do we, as a business owner, make sure that we innovate during that time by getting machinery that we do, like, so that we can increase production, increasing our workforce, increasing our, all those things we need to do around our business to be able to take advantage of the increase in demand? How do we do that without overcapitalizing and then finding ourselves, holding the bag, so to speak, if it just all falls over tomorrow?
Well, in one word, carefully. Do all this carefully. Look, I think fundamentally, though, we've got to go before God, and we've got to be assured in our own minds that we're not going to participate in this recession.
That's good. Yeah.
Now, I'm a great believer in that. Look, I do believe in what some people loosely call the prosperity gospel. You know me better, Craig, than somebody who would just preach prosperity without also preaching the whole of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But look, fundamentally, our businesses should do okay all the time.
Yes.
That's not to say that there won't be challenges.
Yeah.
So I think first of all, our mindset should be saying to us, we're not going to participate in the recession. So we are not going to be a failing business. I think the next thing, which is very practical, is to keep asking the question, how do I best solve somebody's problem?
Yeah.
That question is there all the time, regardless of where we happen to be in the business cycle.
It's good.
Businesses that continue to successfully solve somebody's problem, they will thrive. And they do thrive regardless of what's happening overall in the economy.
Yeah, it's good.
You mentioned, and I mentioned before you, that during the one of the responses to things like COVID and its effect on the workforce would be to actually replace people with machines. Now, we've seen a lot of that happen over time as wages have increased and so on, and that there tends to be displacement of certain jobs. People fear that, but in fact, throughout history, technology has never actually done away with work.
Yes.
And the reason is new needs begin to emerge, or work that was previously done within households actually finds its way into the market. So just one very simple example of this would be gardeners and lawn mowing companies. Most of the people I know now pay someone to mow their lawn.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was talking to a young fellow just the other day who's about to start up a lawn mowing business. And he'll do jobs around the garden and so on, trimming hedges and such like. And he'll do quite well. In fact, not long ago, he was looking at buying a business and a lawn mowing business. And look, the asking price was as much as you would pay for a house in one of the major cities in Australia. So that's a reasonably good business. And it's not recession proof, but it's a reasonably good business, because that's an example of what economists call production that has moved out of the household and into the market.
Yeah, that's
the
good.
Same things happened in the area of, for example, childcare, where now often both parents are working. And so children go into childcare. And I have both a daughter and a wife involved in childcare.
Yes.
And Christian childcare, I think, is a wonderful, wonderful thing for us to be able to access. So we've got to keep focused, I think, all the time on delivering the solution to somebody's problem successfully.
Yeah.
It's very important that we focus on keeping income up.
Yeah.
You see, in business, you can maintain yourself, sustainably in the financial sense, either by increasing revenue or reducing costs, or some combination of the two. I think reducing costs is something we should always be looking at. It's not something we should only do during a recession, but we shouldn't see that as the savior for our business.
Yeah, that's good.
In other words, managing prudently means we should always be looking at what's happening to our cost base, but our primary focus needs to be on increasing revenue. Again, go to the Lord, pray issues through. Do I need to change something about the product that I'm offering to the market?
That's good.
We talked a little bit about replacing people with machinery earlier. I think there's a role for that as well. There are lots and lots of areas in which robots can now be used. I have a particular interest in what's happening in the agricultural industry. Here in Australia, we do have a particular problem attracting workers into agriculture, partly because so much of the work is in remote areas, so much of that work is seasonal. We're now seeing the development of machinery that can harvest crops, that can maintain crops relatively cheaply and very, very efficiently.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of applications of drone technology, for example. I have a nephew who was a commercial pilot, and that industry went through some pretty tough times a few years ago. So he actually got out of flying big aeroplanes into drones. Yeah. And he's developed a very, very successful and innovative business with drones. And basically in his business, he trains people how to use drones. And drones are now being used in many different applications. Here in Australia, they're being used to look for sharks in the water to keep our beautiful beaches safe. So surf life-saving clubs are now using them. A drone can even deliver a life-saving vest or something to somebody who's in trouble in the ocean. And they can do that within minutes, like within maybe 2 or 3 minutes of a distress signal. They're being used on building sites for security, for example. They're being used many, many applications in agriculture to deliver insecticide to a plant, a single plant in a whole field that has, say, an insect attack. So long before an insect or worm attack can sort of spread throughout a crop, these things can actually be identified and dealt with straight away without going to the expense of, maybe spraying through the whole crop. There are all sorts of innovations going on.
Yeah, it's great.
And, I think it's a good thing. All of us who are entrepreneurial, who are leaders in the business world, read all you can about the innovators. It will really, really encourage you. Yeah. And that you too can be an innovator in your own area.
That's great. I love what you said before about being a problem solver, right? Solve a problem. That was something that I learned when I first got into business. Like that was actually one of the big keys that I attribute my success to. Is at the end of the day, I've just focused on being able to solve problems. That's it. Yes, I've had different titles or business names or whatever, but at the end of the day, all what I was a problem solver. I identified a problem and found a solution to it. And that's what innovation is figuring out how you can, if you can identify a problem and come up with a solution for it, you will be recession proof, because it's, I mean, there is, and I want to end on this, is there are endless, and you've heard them all, amazing stories of recession businesses. Google and the whole gamut of these big businesses that actually started in recessions. Why? Because they found a problem and they provided a solution for it. And so I believe us as leaders in the business world, especially, we can very easily protect ourselves against the ups and downs of a recession by innovating. Find a problem, find an innovative way to solve that problem, and you will find yourself not being affected by the recession and hopefully be a success story. Okay, so let's continue our conversation around innovators, and let's turn our focus to the business world, although we have already been talking a little bit about the business world already. But let's shift our focus to one of the greatest innovators in business or in tech, Apple. Yes, if you know me, I'm an Apple fanboy. I've got countless Apple devices everywhere, and I'm Apple till I die. Well, I'm not going to say that, because someone better could come along eventually, but they'd have to have something quite incredible to be me. Now, if you're anything like me, you get really, really excited around this time of year because a new iPhone is announced. Now, although I don't buy a new phone, well, I used to buy a new iPhone every year. Like every time they bring out an update, I'd always get a new one. I'm a little wiser with my money now and know that it's not that important, and focused on investing in our mission now rather than new phones. However, I still get really, really, really excited when they launch a new iPhone. The iPhone 14 just launched, and while yes, I admit Apple have lacked in innovation over many years since they did the AirPods, that was probably their last big innovation, and everything else has been, let's say, improvements rather than innovations. However, they have brought out their new phone with a new feature that has just been so innovative that everyone now is copying it. That because of this one little feature, almost immediately after the Apple event that they announced it, on social media, all of the other phone companies were kind of advertising their version, and that is the dynamic island. So cool. I was excited about it. I'm like, well, actually, I recently dropped my phone and broke it. Maybe I won't go and repair it. Maybe I'll get myself a new iPhone so I can have an island. But then wisdom prevailed. I'm like, no, I'm going to stay focused on the mission. Not right yet, but that dynamic island, this new innovation in the phone has just brought out this, now from the notch, or that's turned into a pill now, is now a dynamic island for Apple. When you're talking smartphones, everyone hates the notch. There's notches. How big is the notch? It's always the story. Well, now Apple didn't even just make it a pill. They made it a dynamic island, and now they've created all these features around this one thing that is such a pain point for most smartphone users. I know, first world problems, right, Dr. Rod? That we complain about this little space in our screen being black. But what they did is they innovated. They didn't just take this thing and make it smaller. They took it and made a feature out of it. They really innovated. Now all the notifications come out of it, and they've actually used it as a feature now. Now, since this iPhone's been brought out, it has been wrought with problems. People will say that in Instagram and in TikTok and in other apps, the camera is shaking. They say that there's issues of the Apple CarPlay connectivity, and there's all these issues. Now, there's all these complaints about these these things, but I actually think back to whenever I've gotten a new Apple device, Dr. Rod, and I remember when the iPad Pro first came out. Actually, no, the first iPad. When the first iPad brought out, I bought it sight unseen. I had never touched one. I had never even played with one. I just saw it and went, I've got to have that. That's going to fit perfectly in my business. And it did. It became a great business tool. But I was one of those what we call early adopters, right? And as an early adopter, I'm well aware that people are innovating, and I know when I get something new, it's a little bit annoying, but I don't get upset if they have problems because I just shrug it off. It was really interesting when I saw all these people on social media all complaining about the fact that the iPhone's not working and everything like that. It actually made me think, I'm like, why don't I care? And then I realized when you talk about the innovations, and there's this theory of called diffusions of innovation, which actually groups people into the different levels, whether they're early adopters or whatever. I would consider myself an early adopter, and as an early adopter, I don't care about those things because I understand its innovation. Dr. Rod, would you call yourself an early adopter?
No. I'm an economist. I observe how people behave. No, generally speaking, no. I'm not. Personally, I'm not a big risk taker. I'm very interested in the technology. I read a lot about it, but I still have an XS. That's my iPhone.
Wow.
Lots of reasons for that, and I think that's partly my upbringing. Of course, I was always taught you only buy something when you need it.
Yes.
And probably at my age, I should be sort of outgrowing that effect of my upbringing. But I think, look, what's happening in this market is not just the early adopters, but also in this market, you've got some people who are turning over their phone because there are a few models behind.
Yeah.
And maybe updates are no longer being provided, or it's just too old. In some cases, it's not worth replacing the battery and so on and so forth. So you not only got early adopters, but because smartphones are generic in the sense that there are many, many brands that have been on the market now for a few years, some people, no doubt, who are complaining weren't necessarily early adopters, but were just replacing an old phone anyway.
Yes.
The other thing too is that these phones are quite expensive, and generally speaking, people equate quality with cost. And so when something unexpected happens, like what seems like a fairly basic failure, then they get a little bit upset.
Yep.
The other thing that's going on too, I think, is if you have a look at the contract, and of course nobody ever does, it's too long and you haven't got time to read it anyway. But if you actually have a look at the contract, you contract out of being upset if anything goes wrong effectively.
Yes.
So nobody ever guarantees their software, providing it's not a hardware issue, and it seems that most of it is software issues. And these are pretty well inevitable because it's almost impossible to fully test software before you release a product to the market. If these are software problems, they will be fixed fairly quickly and most likely satisfactorily. And as you've alluded to already, Craig, I think that there have already been a number of updates to the operating system which have been designed to resolve some of these problems. So, yeah, it's a pretty complex situation. I think now, of course, we've got these two very strong rivals in the market. You've got Samsung and Apple in particular. They compete on many different levels, including in the courtroom.
Yes.
and that's the nature of this kind of market, where you've got a few very large players and lots of others sort of nibbling at the edges of that competitive mix. But there's a lot of pressure to at least pretend you've got a new innovation, to make a lot of it, so that you can sell a lot of phones. And yes, definitely some of that market will be early adopters. There's no doubt about that. And look, I'm sure we all know people, they buy it because they just love the technology. They're not trying to be one up on their neighbors. They just love the technology. And frankly, I think if I was a far wealthier person than I am, I would be regarded as an early adopter on just about everything.
Yeah.
Because I love the technology. I love to see these technological developments. I love to see what's happening in the marketing of these products as well, because to me, it's an expression of human creativity. And as of course, you know, that I believe that part of being a Christian, being made in the image of God, is to reflect his own creativeness. And so when I see all of this evidence of human creativity around me, I just marvel at it. So yes, if I was in receipt of a more secure, more constant and higher income, I would be regarded as an early adopter myself, I think.
That's good. I think that the reason why I actually bring this up and feel like it's a good topic for us to talk about on this podcast is I want us as leaders to understand this diffusion of innovation, right? I think it's important for us to understand it, because when we understand where people in the marketplace like sit, it allows us to innovate and set our expectations. I think that is probably the key thing here is I want to encourage you to set your right expectations when you do innovate, because we're obviously the theme of today is innovation, but we need you to be educated on your innovation. And so understanding the bell curve, right? So innovators, and you're probably wondering, why don't more people innovate? Well, they say that on average, only 2.5% of the population are innovators. So if you're someone that can innovate, if you're someone who can, like Dr. Rod said earlier, just identify a problem and come up with a solution to it, if you actually take that time out, you are now in the top 2.5% of the population. Don't you think that is going to put your business forward? Don't you think that's going to put your ministry forward? Don't you think that's going to put your organization forward if you are operating like the 2.5%? But where your expectations should be set is also that, yes, there's few that are innovating, but we as innovators need the early adopters. We can't do it without the early adopters, because the early adopters that actually take on our new concepts, our new ideas, the new way of doing business, the new way of delivering a product or service, the new way of using a product, like or a new device. There is only actually, and early adopters are actually only make up 13.5% of the population. So just remember, like when you've innovated, you're like, why is not everyone come running towards me? Well, it's because only 13.5% of the population now think about it. It's not the whole population. Think about just 13.5% of your target audience are going to be early adopters. So you're only actually targeting a few people to get it. Now, they say that it's called a marketing chasm. The biggest challenge between the early adopters and the early majority is this marketing chasm. How like for it to get real momentum, that's the challenge. And how do we do that? We must have a great relationship with those early adopters. Get their feedback, build relationship with them, do what Apple does. They've created fanboys. Like they got me with those Mac and PC ads, with the skinny guy his name is Mac, and the slightly chubby guy that was called PC, and he kept getting sick, and the Mac guy he's like, I don't ever get viruses, right? So they got me, right? They got me as part of their community. And because I'm part of the community, I'm part of the ecosystem, I'm sold on on what they do, because they've given me something that's made my life better. They've actually given me something that's different, that's set me apart. And so we as innovators need to make sure we build a really solid relationship with those early adopters, because and get feedback from them, build relationship with them, because it's those ones that are actually going to help our business then get over that marketing chasm into the early majority. And once we hit that early majority, that's where we actually really take on. But the early majority only take things on after it's been proven, right? That's why you're getting all these people that are complaining about the Apple iPhone having these issues. I guarantee you most of them are people that have switched from Android, or they're people that aren't really Apple fans. They just happen to have an Apple phone. But unless you're most of the fanboys and fangirls will kind of take it like, yes, they'll complain and they'll go, yeah, look, fix your act, Apple. But it's not like they're going to jump ship to Android. No way. That's like swearing. That's blaspheme to think that we're going to jump from Apple to Android. And that's what you need to get. You need to build the relationship with those early adopters, because those early adopters are going to help you spread to the early majority. And then it's that early majority that need it proven first, but then those are the ones that will then take it to the masses. So as business leaders, as leaders in ministry, in business, in politics, and wherever you are, make sure you're innovating, but understand who you're communicating to, that you're innovating to early adopters first. And then those early adopters, we need to build relationships so that then we can reach the early majority. So let's kind of transition from there about reaching people and talk about our next topic about ministry leaders, about reaching people. I came across this article, Dr. Rod, and I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. Now, not all our viewers will be in Australia, and hopefully we have that great of an impact all over the world. But there's this place in Australia called Arnhem Land, and I actually know a number of people that have spent a lot of time doing ministry trips to Arnhem Land. Now, it is it's almost central in Australia. It's in the Northern Territory, real desert, real center of Australia stuff, and it's where a lot of tribes of our Australian First Nationals, our Aborigines, live. And there's a lot of communities out there that there's a lot of people trying to reach them for Christ, right? And I actually felt that, first of all, I was excited to see that there was 130 people baptized in this article, 130 people baptized in Arnhem Land. I'm like, that's amazing to see people that are from such an isolated community still hearing about the message, hearing the gospel and being touched by it, and they've feeling that pull and to be baptized and commit their life to Christ. But what I actually felt, because obviously we're on this trend of talking about innovators, was the way that it was being done. It was, these people weren't just going in, just trying to go, here's our way of worshiping God and this is the way it should be done. What they were doing is they were innovating, and they were finding ways to integrate the gospel into their cultures, into their existing cultures and traditions, to try to make it more understandable and more relatable to them, rather than just trying to cram it down their throat. And then there was this one quote in the article that really, really got me, that I thought was a real testament to what they're doing. Is the person being interviewed said they're more Christians than we are, according to the dictates of Acts, sharing possessions and worshiping regularly, and the Spirit of our living God is alive 7 days a week, not just on Sundays. And I thought that was beautiful, because I know people that have been out there, and the people that are in relationship with God. They are just, they're all about it. And it's amazing what we can actually learn from that as leaders in ministry. What if we were able to innovate in a way that we could connect with people that their lives would be changed, that they'd be worshiping God 7 days, not just on Sunday. Dr. Rod, what's your take on this story?
Look, I found it really interesting, Craig. And first, I was a little tiny bit wary. I wondered, does this integration, is it integration or is it blending? Because obviously we're not so keen on blending.
Yes.
Christianity with other religious practices or cultural practices. But I think what's been going on here is a recognition that the gospel is relevant across all time, and across all geography and across all cultures. And so instead of having, formal buildings and hymnals and printed out orders of service and baptismal fonts and all of these kinds of things,
flashing lights, LED screens.
Yeah, there's no smoke machines out there because you'll never find a PowerPoint to plug it into, and you'll never be able to buy it and buy the smoke, the liquid you've got to pour into the machine. In any case,
the only smoke machine is Uncle Barry. That's the chain smoker of the tribe.
And, it was interesting that the photo, one of the photos that accompanied the article, showed people being baptized just in a local creek. And I guess there were no crocodiles there.
I would hope not. Or that's real faith, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But it was these baptisms, they were built around a ceremony which they call the cross dedication ceremony, which apparently is quite unique in that area of remote Australia. And so this was an innovation that had been developed within the communities. And there were, you might call them missionaries, or they were regular church chaplains who actually lived within the communities. They didn't sort of visit. They weren't doing a circuit or anything like that. They were actually living in the communities, and they saw the value in this innovation which had grown within the community itself. And it was quite a simple ceremony, really. A cross was installed, a simple homemade cross. And then there was a whole range of festivity that was built around the cross. And I should say built around the cross,
that's good,
but not built upon the cross.
Yeah.
In other words, Christianity itself wasn't, as it were, being sacrificed for cultural reasons or in order to embrace other religious practices. It was still centrally Christianity, that you could make no mistake about that. But the innovation was saying, well, look, what I'm used to in, say, an urban area of Australia, that's not going to work here. And as you say, Craig, the environment we're used to in many of our metropolitan areas is a building, a fixed building. We go inside, particularly if it's an evangelical or Pentecostal church, or where there's a charismatic influence, it tends to be dark. There's lots of lights, and there's smoke and amplified music, and it's all great. I love it.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. No, yep.
It's perfect in the right context,
yes.
But that context isn't going to work out there in the context of a very remote part of Australia. It was remarkable that this article was talking about 130 baptisms simultaneously. That doesn't sound like a high number, I know, to many, say, from North America, but given the context, that is quite astonishing. So what they did was to build upon an innovation within the local community.
Yeah.
It is clearly a Christian form of celebration. Because of the nature of the communities, this lasts a few days, and it's a little like some of the kinds of celebrations that are recorded in the Old Testament, in fact. And look, I just applaud the communities and those in the churches that are active in that area and have been, incidentally, for over 100 years. So they've really stuck to it.
Yeah.
And I think they've done a great job. And it's a wonderful thing to see so many people coming to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
Yeah, it's great. I think that the real encouragement here is, obviously, as leaders, we need to be able to innovate, but innovate within the culture in which we are aiming to influence, while not losing our own culture. So we don't want you to change your values. We don't want to change who you are. We don't want to change you to change your purpose and what you're driving towards. But we need to innovate around that, not changing who you are, but innovating so that you can connect with your audience or the people you're trying to lead. We have to find that way where we can integrate some of those things. But even more so, and I suppose a separate message is to all our pastoral leaders, all our ministry leaders out there. Would you like to see 130 people baptized at your church this Sunday?
Well, I can put my hand up to that. I'd
exactly,
love to.
Right? Like, wouldn't you like, well, are you actually innovating in your community? Or have you just set up a church, set up a Sunday service and expect people to come? Are you integrating and innovating in your local community where you're making an impact, being a part of the community? Because it's only through relationship that transformation can happen. It's only through relationship that you can actually have influence over someone. And we need to be able to innovate so that we can build those relationships, so that we look different. Look, God has called us to be separate from the world. We have to be separate from the world, right? He says, be in the world, not of the world. And so we do have to be separate. But we also need to innovate and look different from what everyone knows of Christians. Because let's be honest, we as Christians, we haven't done the best at representing ourselves all the time. Right? Christians do amazing things. I'm not downplaying what we have done. But let's be honest, if you ask the average non-Christian, they wouldn't have the best view of a church or of pastors or of churchgoers. We need to innovate in that so that they can see something different about us. We need to innovate. There's been so many people that I've built relationship with that they're like, I know that there's something different about you, but you're not like one of those typical pastors, or you're not like one of those typical Christians that they're like, you're all on fire, like for Jesus. Like you're always, but you do it differently. And it attracts them and it makes them more interested. So if you want to have an impact on your community, if you want to be a leader in your community, a ministry leader, and actually change your community, we need to find ways to innovate. We have to find ways to innovate in our communities to actually make impact. And you know what? As always, the links to all our articles are all down below in the description. But I want to give a shout out to all those people that have planted seeds over the years in Arnhem Land, because I know there's people that travel there every year. I know some people that travel there a couple of times a year or multiple times a year or whatever to be able to do ministry, and they've just gone and planted seeds and planted seeds and planted seeds. I want to say congratulations to all of you, because this report is actually part of the seeds that you have sown. So well done. Look, let's get on to one last part, our our leadership lessons from Luke. As I was reading through Luke a number of years ago, I just saw so many different articles, so many different messages and lessons that jumped out at me about my leadership that we thought we'd share it. And then in line with what we've been kind of talking about today is, I suppose, a warning. I felt to end off today's session with a bit of a warning for you out of Luke around this theme of innovation, because when we're innovating in business, in ministry, it can be very easy to keep our eyes focused on the innovation, on how we're different and how we're succeeding through innovation and all the amazing things that are happening through those sorts of things. And it kind of, this passage echoes, what Elon Musk was his sentiments earlier. And it is in Luke 12, verse 13. I'm going to read it out today. I don't always read it out, but I'm going to read it out. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and goods. And then I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but not riches towards God." If you're going to innovate, but only focus on the benefit for yourself, that's storing up for yourself. Remember, innovation, like Elon Musk was saying, was we're innovating, but we're innovating for the ultimate purpose. We're driving everything forward. We want others to succeed as well. This man was storing up wealth for himself. It's not bad to have wealth, and like we've spoken about in recession, make sure you save some. Make sure you do protect yourself, and there's wisdom in that. But we need to keep our eyes focused on the mission. And it says, for those that are storing up for himself, but not rich towards God. How are we rich towards God? Well, Jesus plainly says this. For you who do this to the least of these, do it to me. And so we as leaders need to make sure that as we're innovating for a purpose that's a benefit of everyone. We're innovating to better our community. We're innovating to make the lives of our employees and our team easier and better. We're innovating to make our industry better, not just to make ourselves better. Dr. Rob, what do you take from the warning of storing up? Being an economist, obviously there's wisdom in storing up, having savings, etc. You're obviously benefiting from that, in your retirement, quote unquote retirement. You decided to retire and then plant a church. Obviously, you've worked hard over your years and you've stored and you've invested, and now that investment is going back into your ministry and going back into benefiting. I see how much you sacrifice, and people watching, you have no idea how much this man is sacrificing for the kingdom. But how do we find that balance between wisdom of storing up, but not just storing up for ourselves, but storing up for God?
Another good question, Craig. I think that's one of your specialities. Look, many, I'm sure, will be aware of the so-called storehouse principle. And the storehouse is mentioned numerous times in the Old Testament. And storing up in the good years in preparation for the lean years is a pretty important principle in the Word of God.
Yep.
And it comes under the general heading of prudence.
Yep.
So this parable is not a parable against prudence. What I think, it's a parable against focusing on self.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole reason why this foolish, rich person was storing things up was for his own benefit. And I think we need to have the attitude, as we discussed right at the outset of this particular video, God owns my business. If I'm in business, God is the owner.
Yep.
And I steward everything on behalf of God, so that even in the storehouse, my focus is still on God, who owns the storehouse.
Yes.
And he owns everything in the storehouse. Now, that's not to say that God wants us to be poor or to live poorly. I don't think God has a problem at all with us living well. In fact, one of my favorite topics is Wesley's sermon on the uses of money. And he basically says, gain as much as you can without hurting yourself or others.
Yeah.
Save as much as you can after being generous to your whole household.
Yep.
Yourself, your spouse, your children, and back in those days, your servants, and then give all you can. I think that's a really good way of looking at our role as Christian innovators, as Christian leaders, that, we need to put in lots of effort, gain as much as we can. Yep, put stuff in the storehouse, but remembering it's going into the storehouse to enable us to give into the kingdom of God, into the future. So the whole point of the parable, I think, is this: don't do it for your sake, but do it for his sake and for the sake of his kingdom.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So as we innovate, yes, push forward, but keep focusing on that it's to improve everyone's life, not just your life. You shouldn't be more cushy. You shouldn't be sitting back and just chilling because of the innovation. Everyone needs to benefit. Your team needs to benefit. The community needs to benefit. Your suppliers, clients, everyone should benefit from your innovation, because keep your eyes peeled on that great warning. Are you doing it for selfish reasons or for the kingdom? So that kind of brings it to a wrap, Dr. Rod. Thank you very much for your sharing your wisdom and your time. We really appreciate this. It's such an honor for me to be able to share our conversations and to be able to share our time with you, the viewers. So, hey, if you enjoyed any of the stuff that was shared on here, chuck a comment. We'd love to read your comments and your feedback on some of these ideas. Maybe share some ideas on how you feel like you're innovating, or how you'd like to innovate your business, your family, your community, or your ministry. We look forward to reading all of those comments and replying to them to you also. We've actually been speaking a little bit today about the importance that purpose actually plays in a lot of this stuff. Yes, you need to innovate, but being focused on your purpose. If you're not quite sure how your purpose plays in on your leadership, we, yes, shameless plug, have a free leadership development program that is all based around first understanding what your God-given, divine appointed purpose is and how you can utilize that to become a better leader. Check the link down below. That we would love to see you take advantage of that free resource. And as mentioned before, all other resources and references of things we've been speaking about are all below in the discussions as well. But thank you once again for watching us at another episode. Dr. Rod, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Awesome. Bless you all and have a spectacular day. And we'll see you next week with next week's episode of On the Cube Leadership Podcast.